And Dwayne Bravo does add a little flavour to everything he does.
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of Radio Cricket. That's 48. Sachin Tendulkar and Ricky Ponting's combined strike rate this IPL. I'm Nishant Joshi, and I'm joined by the man often mistaken for being slightly more rugged, slightly more washed up, Steve Smith. He is available for bit part roles in all Bollywood movies, because every film needs a token white guy. It is James Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Nishant. I have an equally exotic name and similar leg spinning ability, so that's awfully kind of you. How are you? We haven't spoken for a couple of weeks. What have you been up to?
Well, James, I was invited onto an MTV India show last night, and I was told that the show would be for a hipper, younger audience, and that there'd be lots of joking around, and that it would be with a well-known Indian comedian who I've known for a while. The show was supposed to be revolving around cricket, and it was half an hour long, and that I appeared on it via Google Hangout. Now, after 15 minutes of pretending to laugh along to their jokes, I finally got asked a question by the MTV host. Now, James, this host was an incredibly pretty lady, but playing along to stereotypes of female IPL hosts, she didn't really have much going for her. And by not much going for her, I mean to say that during our brief interaction, I could literally feel my brain cells losing IQ points. First of all, James, I was asked a question in Hindi. Now, I can understand Hindi in the same way that Shahid Afridi understands being told to play sensibly. That is to say, after some head scratching, I understand the words, but by the time they compute, it is far, far too late. And the thing, James, I actually speak 7 languages, yet after being asked one question in Hindi, I made myself look like I was speaking in free association gibberish. Now, my next interaction with this lovely, suspiciously wheatish host a few minutes later led me to make a joke about Ravi Shastri, in which I may or may not have compared him to a Nazi general for the IPL. And, James, this joke didn't go down so well. The reaction from the host was as priceless as it gets, by which I mean I would pay any amount of money to never see that look on someone's face ever again after I've told a joke. The whole experience was pretty cringeworthy and quite embarrassing. And the thing is, my dear listeners, I don't actually get embarrassed, which should tell you how embarrassing it really was.
Well, I'm not surprised, Nishant. This is dreadfully unfair on Nazi war generals. And speaking of awkward interactions live on Indian TV, Nishant, we should mention Gautam Gambhir's latest little tiff. Not content with last week having an altercation with Virat Kohli, this week he's decided to get himself into a bit of an argument with Rahul Dravid, of all people. Now, it's one thing having a bit of a contretemps with Virat Kohli, a man whose mouth is filthier than Sonny Leone's back catalogue, but it's another thing to get involved in some argy-bargy with Rahul Dravid, a man who even Greg Chappell got on with. So it was another fairly unsavoury thing from Gautam Gambhir, although he actually took to the Hindustan Times this week and wrote an article defending his behaviour. He said, and I quote, "But what's disturbing is that a lot of people feel I'm not in control of my emotions. That's wrong, and most often my actions are wrongly interpreted. I had no tiff with Rahul Dravid," which is absolutely fine if 500 million people hadn't seen it live on television. But anyway, I suppose the bigger issue here for Gambhir is that he has, sadly for him, been dropped from India's ODI squad for the forthcoming Champions Trophy in England. So
very sad indeed, James. Very sad.
Well, I knew you'd be upset. But anyway, so Nishant, what's your take on his exclusion and indeed India's squad as a whole? Any surprises for you?
Well, I suppose that there aren't any real surprises. I mean, if you look at India's squad, or the Chennai Super Kings second 11, as I like to call them, the major changes are, of course, that they've dropped Gautam Gambhir and Yuvraj Singh. They've also got rid of Ashok Dinda. Well, no idea why. There's still no room for Virender Sehwag as well, who it seems like they've completely shunned. And perhaps rightfully so as well. There aren't too many complaints emanating for that exclusion. And of course, Sachin
You increasingly need a lot of room for for me, of course. But anyway, sorry.
And of course, you got Sachin Tendulkar's out of the picture too. And to me, it looks like a tremendously lightweight Indian side, and certainly the weakest side that they've sent for any major ODI tournament in a very long time. And ahead of Yuvraj Singh, they've picked Rohit Sharma, and he's been given another chance in the middle order. And as everybody knows, he's been a massive underperformer for India. He's now been playing for India for 6 whole years, and he scored just 2,000 runs in ODIs. Now, to put this into perspective, Virat Kohli has been playing for a year less and already has over 4,000 runs in ODIs. And the thing is that there's no doubting that Rohit has the potential to reach a similar sort of plane as Virat, but I reckon that technically speaking, he simply has not put in the effort required to reach the highest level. And the comparison I would say is that if you go back a few years and look at Hashim Amla, for example, when he first came onto the international scene, he really didn't look cut out for the top level, and most commentators dismissed his chances pretty quickly. I mean, when you look at tapes of Amla a few years ago, he had that same lazy elegance that Rohit has right now, but the key is that Amla went away and objectively looked at himself and said, this is what I need to work on. I need to work on my weaknesses. Both technically and mentally, he went away and he did that superbly. Then now you look at Rohit Sharma, who has a fat IPL contract, and quite frankly, he has a sort of air of a man who lacks passion and he lacks fight just when you see him play for India. I hope that perhaps he can find a mentor who can force him to put in the hard yards, but I'm just not sure whether he wants it badly enough. To me, it seems that considering he's done so well in the IPL over the past few seasons, Rohit Sharma seems to be happy to just rest on his laurels, because you don't need a great technique to survive in the IPL, and often you can get away with being pretty careless.
Okay, well thanks, Nishan. That's a very talented answer you've given us there on Rohit. So, but I mean, I don't know. I don't think I'm quite as pessimistic as you are. I mean, I look at this India squad and I think it's full of youth and vibrancy. You know, you've got Shikhar Dhawan in there, who I've said before, I think is in the Schumacher category when it comes to driving. So I think he'll be effective in England driving in V. We've also got Dinesh Karthik, who again has had a wonderful IPL season. We've got Serge Jadeja, of course. So, you know, we've often complained that India haven't done away with the old guard as quickly as they should have done. So don't you see a bit of hope from that point of view?
I do see some sort of positivity in the fact that India haven't really clung on to their old guard like an ex-lover, but it does seem like they just don't have that sort of depth in talent that they once seemed to have. It seems that it just seems like, especially in English conditions, against 2 new balls, I think someone like Murali Vijay, I think Murali Vijay's defence against 2 new balls, he's really going to be seriously found out. And I think his defence is pretty much looser than a wizard's sleeve. And the man that I'm really looking forward to is seeing Dinesh Karthik bat, because I think that he should be opening for India in the Champions Trophy. Because against these 2 new balls, in conditions which are generally going to swing, I mean, India facing some very good fast bowling in their group, South Africa, West Indies, Pakistan as well. And to be honest, I just can't see Murali Vijay scoring more than a handful of runs against him. I think that Dinesh Karthik is solid as a rock. He's in exceptionally good form. He's transformed his technique in the past year, and he's done the hard yards that someone like Rohit Sharma just hasn't. So I really think that he's very determined. He's got that cricket nous, which I really appreciate. He knows how to operate a chase, and he knows how to operate an innings. He's got that sort of experience of playing for India before, and he's still pretty young. So I think that Dinesh Karthik could be a very good long-term option for India. And in other Champions Trophy news, now to the West Indies, who have, to quite a few people's surprise, replaced captain Darren Sammy with former vice-captain Dwayne Bravo. What do you make of that, James?
Well, I'm a little bit perplexed, Nishan, I must admit. I mean, it should be noted that Sammy is a new dad who started doing a celebration with a baby's dummy whenever he gets a wicket. And while that is quite irritating, it's clearly not irritating enough to retain his place as the West Indies ODI captain, because the Windies board seem to have taken the ability to dance like a showboating moron as the main criteria for being skipper in appointing Dwayne Bravo. I think Ricky Gervais and perhaps even Peter Crouch might feel a little bit unlucky to have lost out. But Let's be honest, the West Indies have been poor recently in ODIs. They've lost 8 of their last 10, including that 5-0 whitewash in Australia, and overall Sammy has only won 19 of his 51 as skipper. But, and it's a big but, you have to weigh that record up against the fact that he's had to deal with more shit than the average sewage worker during that time as skipper. There's been the Gale saga, the Sarwan saga, the numerous pay disputes with the WICB, and he has at least managed to maintain some sort of semblance of unity. I don't think anyone would claim he's the new Brearley, but I bet Brearley himself would have been impressed with his ability to galvanise the side under what's been very difficult circumstances. So, Nishan, I don't think you're someone who's always rushed to Sammy's defence in terms of his tactical nous, but what did you make of this decision?
Well, James, actually, on the whole, I've been a massive fan of Darren Sammy. I mean, I was advocating him for captain a few years ago, and I'm really happy that he actually got the job. Overall, though, I'd say that he's a bit in the Dhoni school, perhaps, in that he's kind of slow to react, and that overall, I really think that he's an excellent leader. To have kind of sewed up those sorts of divisions and at least given a semblance of unity, as you say, I think he's done a miraculous job. And I would only say that, similar to Dhoni, I don't think that tactically he's the best. But in terms of West Indies captains, I don't think, if you look at the past decade or so, it's been very tumultuous, and at the end of the day, beggars can't be choosers. So I think that Darren Sammy has done pretty well with the tools at his disposal, and really, if you look at the West Indies side over the past few years, they have had some tools at their disposal. So, really, I do wonder about the sense in disrupting this sort of continuity that they've had, especially in getting rid of Sammy as the ODI captain, where it seems kind of bizarre, instead of perhaps just getting rid of him as T20 captain, which wouldn't make sense either, because he just won the T20 World Cup. The other alternative would be to get rid of Sammy as Test captain, which would kind of make some sort of sense on some level, because there have been questions about whether he can actually keep his place in there. So overall, if you just compare Darren Sammy with Darren Bravo, I mean, on one hand you've got Darren Sammy, who's been pretty inspirational, pretty lion-hearted, I'm sure everyone will agree. And over the IPL, I've started to realise that I don't actually care much for Dwayne Bravo. I mean, during the last English summer, I'm sure some of our listeners will remember that I mentioned that Kevin Peterson was behaving as if he had a footballer's brain in a cricketer's body. And I feel that there's definitely some aspect of that in Dwayne Bravo too. I mean, at international level, try and cast your mind back. Try to remember just how many matches he's won for the West Indies. He's been playing international cricket for 9 years now. And for all of Dwayne Bravo's perceived talent, I think that everyone would agree that he's been an underachiever. And if you compare that to Sammy, someone who's pretty much made the most of his ostensibly limited talent. And the thing is, James, it kind of irks me about Bravo, because every time he takes a wicket, he celebrates as if he's just won the World Cup single-handedly. But he remains remarkably silent whenever he gets smashed around the park, which, as it turns out, happens remarkably often.
Well, yeah, just on top of the dancing, I now note that he's taken to sort of wearing these bizarre sashes around his neck as well. I think it might be the towel he uses to dry the ball in dewy conditions. But, you know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with metrosexuals being international captains, despite all the flack.
We encourage it, James.
Well, we do, and, you know, I don't think Michael Clarke should get so much flack just because he occasionally uses moisturiser at night instead of wrestling crocodiles. But I just do not see Dwayne Bravo as a man that's going to be capable of keeping this very parlous West Indies ship steady sailing on what are notoriously tricky waters, as Sammy has done in recent years.
I totally agree, James. And, you know, further to that point, I think that Bravo is pretty much the opposite of Darren Sammy, if you think about it, who's pretty much united the West Indies through his humility and introduction of what I guess you can describe as a utilitarian setup, at least to us outsiders. And on the other hand, you have Dwayne Bravo, who's a diva with a Beyonce-sized ego, and overall, someone who loves to draw so much attention to himself isn't going to bring a group of players together. And given the West Indies' recent history of players falling out with each other over what sort of Gangnam style they do, and along with falling out with the coaches, with the board, replacing Darren Sammy as captain could well bring an end to their stability. And of course, as we all know, James, Dwayne Bravo has a side career as a hip-hop artist. Now, I'm not saying that an international captain representing his people is a hip-hop artist. I'm just saying that he definitely shouldn't. And now we move on to England, who have recalled one of social media's, I guess you could describe, whipping boys.
Well, they have, Nishan. Indeed, yes, Ravi Bopara is back in the squad to much angst on Twitter, but I would say in the selector's defence, Bopara has got the biggest, most doleful eyes in world cricket, so I imagine trying to drop him for good is rather like trying to drop a puppy off a bridge. Also, in more cricketing terms, he did, we should remember, do pretty well in that ODI series against Australia last year, and his bowling does certainly and increasingly come into the more than handy category. And Jeff Miller, the chief selector, has hinted that this was the reason why he's come into the side. But I suppose if he is coming in on the basis of being an all-rounder, then someone like Luke Wright, as so often, might feel a little bit aggrieved. He is back in the squad after being absent for some undefined personal issues last year. So on that basis, I suppose we wish him well. But as you say, he's not the most popular character on Twitter, but he does seem to bring these things on himself, such as when he was on tour in Sri Lanka last year with England, and he famously tweeted that he'd be playing FIFA all day because there was nothing else to do in UNESCO World Heritage Site Kandy, which I think is the sort of thing which I think doesn't quite endear him to people at times. But anyway, someone tweeted me to suggest he is the English Rohit Sharma, so
I think both of them are simultaneously disappointed yet happy with those comparisons, because both are massive underachievers who maybe are always just looking to the guy behind them, and they're probably the sort of people who have that sort of dissonance in their own mind, who think that they're both ahead of each other.
But Nishan, moving on, are there any other Champions Trophy selections which have caught your eye more than a Shilpa Shetty nip slip?
Well, I mean, if you go to South Africa, I mean, they've left out wicket-keeper and a friend of radio cricket, Quinton de Kock. He's a young lad, still just 20 years old, so he should get plenty more chances for the national side, but it does seem a bit risky to be entirely reliant on AB de Villiers as your wicket-keeper should he pick up an injury. He already has a huge workload as captain as well, so you'd have hoped that de Kock would have relieved some pressure there. But when there is a yin, there is a yang, of course, and we are happy to see JP Duminy back in the Champions Trophy squad for England. I mean, he has been out since the Australia tour late last year when he got a freak Achilles injury when it just popped after doing some warm downs, doing a shuttle run. And JP Duminy is one of those players who he used to be described as the great white hope of South African cricket, along with AB de Villiers when they first burst on the scene a few years ago. And if they could find that sort of really dynamic partnership, which they had just briefly in the beginning of their careers when they were batting together for South Africa, then I think South Africa could really go far in this tournament. I mean, they've got David Miller as well, who's just scored one of the most ridiculous centuries you'll ever see in the IPL, 101 off 38 balls in a winning chase of 190 off. We've already seen Chris Gayle hit 175 off 66 balls, but I mean, David Miller's knock was just utterly brutal. So South Africa are looking exceptionally strong, of course. The only other non-de Kock related disappointment has to be that Jack Callis made himself unavailable for the Champions Trophy due to personal reasons, and he's saying that essentially he didn't feel that he was in the right mental state to take part in it. And it's quite interesting because Callis is, of course, playing in this 2-month-long IPL, yet he's quite happy to shun the Champions Trophy straight after it. It's a big blow to South Africa because during his 18-year international career, Jack Callis has only ever missed one other tournament, and that was the 2007 T20 World Cup. Even though he hasn't played an ODI in a year now, Callis has been somewhat of a fixture in the South African ODI side, and so I'm sure his presence will be missed.
Dubious cricket politics news now, and in a shock twist, an election involving both the BCCI and ICC has attracted some allegations of impropriety. In this case, it's seen the popular Federation of International Cricketers Association chief executive Tim May, the Australian, ousted from his place as the players' representative on the ICC Cricket Committee to be replaced by commentator and all-round friend of N. Srinivasan, Laxman Sivaramakrishnan. Now, Nishan, obviously ICC elections are the sort of thing that often has even Robert Mugabe holding his nose a little bit, but so what on earth have you made of the week's events?
Well, yes, James. It has been a fair bit of controversy. I mean, Laxman Sivaramakrishnan, we know him as the former Indian player, current full-time commentator, full-time word butcher. He's replaced Tim May as one of the two player representatives on the committee. Other man, of course, being Kumar Sangakkara. This is the ICC Cricket Committee, and it consists of 14 people in total. Now, this is a group meant to be a key advisor and decision maker for playing conditions, especially that of DRS right now. And this committee is a group headed by Anil Kumble. It also has Andrew Strauss as a former player, Ranjan Madugali as a representative of match referees, and who is this name I see? I believe it's Ravi Shastri who's in there as a media representative. Now, immediately, dear listeners, your spidey senses should be tingling a little bit just by hearing who's involved in all this so far. First of all, you have that man once again, Ravi Shastri, who's paid $800,000 per year as a BCCI employee, but is apparently on the committee in the guise of a media representative. Now, James, this isn't just like having a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's like having a wolf in wolf's clothing turning up to a farm with a name tag that says sheep. Then you have Laxman Sivaramakrishnan, who has been an employee of India Cement for 17 years. Now, I'm sure I don't need to remind you that India Cement is the company that owns Chennai Super Kings, and the head honcho is none other than BCCI president, Mr. Srinivasan. Now, at this stage, alarm bells should really be going off. There are enough conflicts of interest on this board to make your average politician look like a saint. And there's been a lot of uproar specifically about the way in which the voting has changed, or in which the captains have changed their decisions. Now, first of all, reports suggest that Tim May had the backing of most of the international captains, with a lot of sources suggesting that it could have been up to 9-1 in his favour out of the 10 international test-playing captains. But then the BCCI naturally weren't too chuffed with that and called in the heavy artillery.
Well, yes, it does seem like if you tangle with Srinivasan Nishant, you end up wearing concrete boots or cement boots, to be precise. But I suppose it's not just that the BCCI seems to be being a little bit heavy-handed. It's that Tim May has an excellent reputation himself for someone who's defended player rights. He's got involved when players haven't been paid on time, such as during the West Indies Cricket Board dispute and also during the Bangladesh Premier League as well. So it does seem a bit of a pity that when you have the BCCI, who don't have a players' association themselves, have essentially ousted perhaps the most visible face of player rights in global cricket at the moment. But perhaps I could ask you for the tail of the tape between the two candidates that were going for this job.
Well, James, Laxman Sivaramakrishnan weighs in at an imposing £140 and measures in at a gargantuan 5 feet 5 tall. Sivaramakrishnan has 3 gods in his name, but the real divine force behind him is that shapeless mass of malevolent energy they like to call Mr. Srinivasan. He is also the man who once described the MRF blimp as an engineering miracle. They call him the Chihuahua of Chennai. He is Laxman Sivaramakrishnan. And in the green and gold shorts, weighing in at £220 and measuring in at 6 feet 2 tall, it is Australia's former off-spinner Tim May. Tim May is 51 years old and has best bowling figures of 5 for 9 in Tests versus the West Indies. May was a key organiser behind the World Cricket Tsunami appeal match in 2004, and like all good Aussies, he loves a barbecue and watching YouTube videos of Richie Bennett.
Well, I think any hope of this being a good, clean fight with nothing below the belt was a little bit optimistic. But, you know, this is politics, this is lobbying, so surely we shouldn't be too po-faced about this sort of thing. What's the problem, Nishant?
Well, James, the key concern is that it seems obvious to all witnesses that the best man for the job just hasn't been picked at the end of the day, and that now on a board meant to represent players' interests. You now have two men who are contracted by the BCCI to be their puppets. Overall, it's not the BCCI's fault for trying to further their own interests, but it's more of a concern that the other boards are just so impotent in trying to combat them, and that that if they do try and stand up to Mr. Srinivasan and the BCCI's bully boy tactics, you'll know you wake up the next day with a horse head made of cement in your bed. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Radio Cricket. Thank you very much once again for joining us. Of course, you can catch us on youtube.com/altcricket. You can follow us on soundcloud.com/Radio Cricket. You can download us from there as well. Or you can catch us on iTunes. Just search for Radio Cricket. And we would like to thank all of you for listening to us. We now have over 10,000 followers on SoundCloud alone, which probably makes us the most popular cricket podcast in the Czech Republic, or at least Eastern Bohemia. We don't want to aim too high, but certainly in Eastern continental Europe, we could lay claim to that. I've been Nishant Joshi.
And I've been James Marsh. Goodbye.
I think it was a very poor performance. One of the worst things I have ever seen done on a cricket field. Good night.